And now, without further ado, the third installment of Arthur Osborne's True Tales of the Supernatural. This one's called The Old Fortran Server Haunt. There was a man, unusual in nature, very unlikely of a man, one to whom much was given freely by many, for the joy of his witness, for the light shining in his eyes he never had to take. He is the recoverer of lost items, and upon the third day of his conference, we find him finishing his lecture on the origin and nature of cursed and blessed objects. This, of course, happened decades ago, and our author is describing the story from the vantage point of the Cursed Objects Auction at a conference on cursed objects, and will be a lecturer, yours truly, that he gives a lecture on the difference between cursed objects and blessed objects. The distinction he found was that with left objects were blessed so, because they were left behind willingly, and cursed objects were cursed so, because they were left behind against wretched objection. Underneath the eye of the author there lay a scar, faded by time and age, of a cat he once knew. Struck him across underneath his eye. The cat, Chico, had been his mother's dear and baby boy, so irreducibly replaced. Gazing into the eyes of his usurper, he thought to mark and remind him, in that moment of vulnerability, that he could have taken his sight. Such a boy would never forget. The eyes, the lines etched under across his face are few, but each one a provenance. Provenance hung heavy in the air in the conference hall. Those assembled, paired to peruse with gimlet eye, poring over those objects that they may never see again, the most legendary of which sat in the key position, surrounded by others of equal, though less visibly, obviously ominous. A grisly tail, dripping with the blood of the lost, a knotty root, ergonomically discovered, crafted, hand-etched with chilling precision, something not considered possible along the time of its craftsmanship, the patina of dust and age centuries past. The center is grotesquely disfigured, and etched across the face of the magnificent tree knot, the pioneer man who laid down the last of the Indian war chiefs that stood against them on contested land, hard fought. That magnificent red man with full head feather headdress painted and red relief background severely whittled firmly by those who would never forget the face of the man, those who he took his dear club. Those who of future centuries may consider it gauche, a defilement, a desecration, which it was of a sacred war club, which gave life from one end and took it away from the other. But for the pioneersman who took the life of the last chief, he was driven, haunted to commemorate the face of the man whose life he took to take his grim prize, the haunted and dread might of one of the last war chiefs in the nation. These and the flags of the two sides of the same family, each with 47 stars, drenched in the blood sacrifice of countless suffering, which rendered them into the hands of injustice, theft, and misfortune, hand embroidered, and with love and with pride, color matched and fresh as the day they were sewn. Of similar but not identical diameter, they never flew, but were displayed in the family room when there was a family room to have. Time after time, such objects find their way for sale, at rates alarmingly tempted to the educated and the lay enthusiast. Victorian flow blue china teacups with saucers, 6 in perfect condition, the prized possession of the aristocracy at the height of imperial power, found their way to one misfortune to another, and no one can deny the divergence from other teacups so accumulated, for some were put into glad hands, delicate rose-painted cups, lost relics of utmost sophistication and artistry. For the last of the flaxen linen and ivory and gold and brocade still held in the ribbon of its makers, the last of which for whom it was possible to spin straw into gold. For centuries these wonders accumulated, and many more were in the hands of a kindly family of stewards, but for misfortune alone were separated and dispersed. Fortunes found and lost can be recovered, but for the most of legendary discoveries the foundations of new achievements can be wrought. And for those dear treasures for whom they were left, and both presence of those so blessed and so cursed wept, and they have wept openly, it were rarer than in a composed moment, private moments after, but in any case is wept over upon remembrance, most often by those who received them. harpoons from the Eskimo, in the tattered papoose, the spats of Bugsy Malone, as crisp as the day they were made, an old banking bench inlaid and reinforced with gold among the breaking point, Depression-era stemware, and English stoneware, hand-milled silverware with the emblem of roses playing across the escutcheon of each fork, a complement of full metal tang knives of French and Italian origin, an auto harp in a colourful shag case, sun blossom worn tone and lacquer and sound, all items hard earned, bitterly fought, and hard to keep. But for all these wonders still yet, for their journey full and broad and diverse as can be, our tale tonight revolves around a ramship, and in the soul residing a gentleman greybeard was Gideon Goolsby, someone who worked on an old legacy mainframe for his entire career in a building no one really knows about, in a corporate park hidden away. He had a passion for the traditional style, and the position offered to him was one where he had an opportunity to serve with magnificence and grace, and serve well he did for as long as he was allowed. Who was being served was questioned little. Intermittently, yes. And Henri was glad to see the machineries running appropriately and to required function. The mysterious Henri dressed in Seville row suits, unstructured charcoal herringbone was his preference. No one knows who or why, or only sometimes when there was even a need. It was questioned, but it was always appreciated. Henri would cry, "Goolsby, where's my pepitas and sultanas?" Milling about the provincial hamlet of a town where he grew up, Mr. Goolsby had a earnest, quiet dignity, and as Mr. Henry was a relative newcomer to the area, he had a curious disposition, and maintained an intrigue as to the reason for the mysterious Mr. Goolsby. He kept an eye on things in the community from his high office 3 floors above the main street of the community, where he wondered over Goolsby's origins and his aims as Gideon merely lived his life. He knew that he had to work with him to understand him, so he invited him for an interview. Affably, eloquently, decisively, the position was found to be Goolsby's. At first, in Goolsby's new life, he found little function required of the facility's potentialities. But in his office, having set his tasks to run, and anticipated for the good maintenance of the systems in question, he found he had time to peruse the substantially large and growing library on tape the facility maintained and expanded. And it expanded Goolsby's repertoire to the point by which he became formidable in the art of establishing new methods for establishing novel structure. After Gideon had settled in and become accustomed to his obligations, he surmised that further assistance was required. Some of the work was disturbingly, perplexingly tricky, and he needed someone who was absolutely raised to solve the problems no one else could. Really, the only thing that was possible was to go overseas, because the people were more obsessed with knowing the specifics inside and out, and it was these people and serendipity that led Pushyami to be his choice. But serendipity was not exactly the watchword of Pushyami's childhood, or you could probably say that it was. From an early age, she was toddling around and stumbled across her father's electrical engineering books and diagrams. She expressed an aptitude for unusually complicated things, and inexplicably enough, her parents encouraged her to the point where before school she had grafted her first hardware schematics under the guidance of her father, and was known for punching above her weight class in her academic career. Takes a lot to be distinguished among so many people, and because of her parents' support and encouragement of her brilliance, it put her ahead. Little did she know that an unusual choice to come to a new land would put her on a path for unbelievable adventure. Broadening his own growth and humbling and encouraging himself in his partner protege, the incomparable Pushyami Gogareddy, the very same Pushyami from an early age had an aptitude and superlative inclination towards computers and technology in its familiar and novel forms. As these forms were diverging and joining in compelling new ways, each method of data preservation, concatenation, transmission, and concordance, that Gordon and Gideon humbly confided and celebrated, that Pushyami's zeal for investigation and understanding of principal mechanics and methods, her persistence in the face of near incomprehensibility, was inspiring, as was his. As they worked together, they felt a camaraderie, and as the weeks turned to months, and the months turned to years, and the years turned to decades of gradual improvement, for all their loyalty they were rewarded only somewhat but enough to remember fondly, and the environs were so rarefied, secluded, delightfully ensconced, tastefully in nature, harmoniously where squirrels were known to cavort and frolic. The most peculiar thing about the whole facility, Pushyami was known to comment to his chagrin, wherefore the automatic toilets, which flush back on you all the time. Such that she composed a little ditty to herself, and would sing to the amusement of those who were to witness her dulcet tones. Oh, those crazy toilets, those automatic toilets. Oh, those crazy toilets that flush back on you all the time. I said those automatic toilets. Oh, those crazy toilets. I'll sell them to the 5 and dime. The questioning of the meaning of their work only deepened throughout the years. Who am I doing this for? What is the person that wants this done? And for the love of God, why? These are the thoughts that went through men's minds, especially as they work on situations where their understanding is limited. Transistors hand wound and spun by the last of the analog artisan ladies out of Hong Kong. The chattering mimeography of micromachinery shimmering in his bones, body soul between them, the whining and chirping and whirring infusing his memories with the drone alchemy of endless memories. He dies keeling over that mainframe in his soul, goes into the machine. It's up to his assistant to help him escape before the building is demolished. Upon the death of the man, there was grave. Though working with him for decades, he felt his loss and the loss of his presence deeply. And there was an intuitive inclination in Pushyami that despite the unexpected departure of Gideon from this earthly realm, that she had not seen the last of them. He was in her thoughts when Henri came into his office to converse with her. I understand this must be a trouble of a time for you, and I just thought there was something that needed to be said at this moment. Pushyami paused. Her ears were listening, primed to hear of anything of any significance he might have to say in this pivotal moment, the end of an era. She waited, ears agape. I just wanted to let you know. My middle name is Enrique. Pushyami looked at him straight in his strange eyes. She was confused by the statement and the innocence and how he made it. I will leave you to it. He departed with those words. Then Pushyami recalled in her moment of silence all the wonderful times, and how much of a creature of habit she was. In fact, she fondly recalled walking by the terminal and a mainframe around 4:45 promptly. Each evening, Mr. Gouldsby, in a practical joke of his, had pre-programmed the terminal. He knew when she would be by, and he always wanted to let her know, with one word on the screen, that he knew her habits. The one word he used was gotcha. She always chuckled as she completed her duties for the day, when the terminal would greet her with a charming statement such as this. The day of the event was solemn, and because of this she wept at the terminal, for she knew not how many days such unusual circumstances could continue. As she wept at the terminal, the screen lit up not only with the familiar phrase, gotcha, but this time a communication, a signifier that he was still there. Enrique? How could it be, she wondered, that he would know this detail that a strange, unusual man had never provided up until now? There must be something unusual going on here, she mused, pacing about the terminal. Pacing about the terminal, she wrote, he's a prig. Mr. Henry had a habit for occupying one conversation to an indeterminate and extended degree. At the time he would talk to you, some intrigue or notion took his fancy. He could and did go on for hours at end, of no nature of notions, nature, philosophy, world travel, cuisine, society, culture. He was one for unusual discoveries. It was often wondered by both Pushyami and Gideon why these discussions and conversations were so persistent. He typed more into the terminal conversationally, the clicking of the keys as if hundreds of beetles scurrying their way across cold tile, but the language was warm and conversational. She asked questions that she was never able to ask the man alive, and inexplicably enough, this strange haunted terminal had answers for each and every one of her most pondered over his inquiries. Each one of his responses had the ring of truth, and she knew that when she heard what he said, that it was truly him within that machine. When she realized this, she realized that it was only one thing that could be done. In the end, the soul of Gideon Gouldsby was saved by his brave girl Friday, Pushyami Go-Get-Ready, with unintentional assistance by their boss, Henri Henry, who thought he was being frugal by relieving Pushyammy of her obligations, yet in so doing liberated her with the skills, experience, and education she needed to save the day. In the nick of time, Pushyammy was able to transfer Gideon Goolsby's very soul into the ram ship that found its way to the auction in Cologne. It was by holding the droning melodies of the machinery surrounding her, drawing the soul signal to the vessel to his escape. Pushyammy had traveled a long way to recover from circumstance. This ram ship which contained her former mentor, the man she had been proud to save from certain doom. In the end, Goolsby, he answers questions, he muses, he marvels at the cusp, at the outer perimeter of his life, from beyond the edge, from beyond death, having shaded death. Pushyammy reveals her new one-of-a-kind prototype, a mobile computer with backwards compatibility to this vintage ram ship. But to a transitionized, somewhat mobile components, most importantly a good camera, microphone and processor, fine memory and memories, and a sturdy motherboard built to last out of thick silicon. She calls it her Goolsby Gotcha, and it is her companion on travels and adventures for her long and illustrious life. Miss Golgeretti's story were so inspirational, her actions most heroic. To witness a contemporary pair in high judging was quite the breathtaking indeed. By the time I saw her, she had tints of silver in her hair, luminous almond chestnut glow shining through her very presence. She had been in that magnificence for many years, and her presence was, and still is, awe-inspiring. To think back on it is wondered what other adventures she had had since, and it is destined that our paths will cross again, if only because of similar interests, familiar circles, and drawn together by passionate inclinations. These and many other stories bound through time will be explored globally, locally, throughout time. After the bidders get their new treasures secured and confirmed as theirs, we see various experts congregating around the new acquisitions, ready to ply their trade as required, to assist in potentially liberating the items from their plight. After hearing all of these trials and travails, after hearing all these tales, I surmised that the only appropriate was some foamy ales, and that the crowd at the Gilded House was larger than ever, as we moved en masse from the auction house to the pub. Those who had won their new treasures brandished them proudly, and you can tell that the night was young, as all involved had a giddy anticipation to see what would emerge from such dealings. Most likely I was to emerge from these locales after a night or two more in Cologne, happenings depending. I got the sense that potentialities were broad and vague in their scope, and almost anything might occur upon the culminations of today's events, and was eager to hear more from those who had made such portentous dealings as were many assembled. The pool of Gilded House was unmistakable. Over the nights there, it was clear to those travellers visiting that they put some secret magic into each foamy pint, so the festivities for our final night of the conference were sure to persist into the late evening. People had a paranoia about them. It was almost optimistic in nature. And you could tell that the folks assembled were drawn out of irresistible curiosity. Of course, those only doomed to such ominous affinities would even assemble so. Still, there was a sense of no envy among those who did not win the bids, rather a curious sense of anticipation to see which offence would unfold. There was an enthusiasm from the community, and those from the knights had before had their interest piqued, with Dieter Moosbrook and Emilio Campoverde in attendance, their tales told and remembered fondly. Though I could tell their journeys and participation in the events unfolding would hold further promise and intrigue for all the days of their lives. Though I knew there were a dozen more that could tell their stories tonight alone, I was sure the journey would be one unforgettable. And that concludes the old Fortran server haunt, written and read by Timothy Vavra. I'll be doing more for this channel, more for the world, more for ProfitandProsper.com, which is soon to launch. More tales from me and my wife, more magic to come. Hopefully you'll tune in for more. Like and subscribe. Why not say it? Yes, indeed. Here's hoping you have a wonderful day.